My name is Zephra Nakamura. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a municipal water treatment engineer for the city of Portland. Every single day, I monitor chemical compositions, calibrate filtration systems, test pH levels, and ensure that 650,000 people turn on their faucets and trust that clean, safe water will flow out. It's methodical work, precise work, work that requires attention to detail, scientific knowledge, and the kind of reliability that people's lives depend on. When I make a mistake, people get sick. When I do my job correctly, no one thinks about me at all. I've been doing this work for 8 years. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering and 2 professional certifications that I maintain through continuing education. I earn $73,000 a year, which is enough to live comfortably, save money, and contribute to my 401k. I am not struggling financially. I am not incompetent. I am not unable to care for myself. And 3 months ago, at my cousin Marcus's engagement party, my mother stood in front of 47 family members, held her wine glass like a prop in some carefully rehearsed performance, smiled her practiced smile, and called me a parasite. She didn't scream it. She didn't lose her temper or raise her voice or create the kind of scene that would make people uncomfortable. She said it the way you'd mention that someone had gained weight or gotten a bad haircut, like she was doing me a tremendous favor by pointing out an obvious truth that everyone else was too polite to mention. Like she was the brave one, finally willing to speak the difficult words that needed to be said. Well, Zephra, she began, and I should have known from that tone, that particular combination of false warmth and barely concealed irritation that she'd been perfecting my entire life. She paused to take a delicate sip of her wine, letting the moment stretch just long enough to ensure she had everyone's attention. I think it's time we talked about your situation. Living at home at your age, relying on us like some kind of parasite. You've got until Christmas to figure out your own life, because frankly, your father and I are tired of enabling your dependence. The word hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Parasite. Not struggling. Not transitioning. Not temporarily staying while handling family responsibilities. Parasite. A creature that feeds off others without giving anything in return. A drain on resources. A burden that weakens its host. You know what happened next? Uncle David, my mother's brother, a man who had supposedly helped raise me, who used to take me fishing when I was 7 and tell me I was smart enough to be anything I wanted, cleared his throat with obvious discomfort and asked if anyone had tried the shrimp cocktail. Just like that. As if my public humiliation was nothing more than an awkward interruption to his appetizer experience. Cousin Sarah, Marcus's sister, who had spent countless hours at our house during high school and knew exactly how much I contributed to that household, suddenly found something absolutely fascinating on her phone screen. She stared at it with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for emergency notifications or winning lottery numbers. Aunt Linda, the host, started gathering empty glasses with desperate efficiency, moving through the room like she was cleaning up after a natural disaster. Her movements were quick and jerky, and she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, especially not me. My father, my own father, who had raised me, who had supposedly loved me for 32 years, studied his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. He examined those brown leather loafers with the kind of scientific intensity one usually reserved for water contamination reports. 47 people in that room. I counted them. 47 family members and family friends who had known me my entire life, who had watched me grow up, graduate from college, build a career, contribute to our community. 47 people who could have said something. Anything. Even just that seems harsh, or maybe this isn't the right time, or let's talk about this privately. But every single one of them decided that my humiliation was background noise. Something to step around, like a puddle on the sidewalk. Something to ignore until it dried up and disappeared on its own. They made a collective choice to prioritize their comfort over my dignity, and they made it in seconds. I watched them all choose silence. I watched them all choose her. I watched 47 people decide that maintaining the peace was more important than defending someone who was being publicly degraded for no reason other than her convenience. Cousin Marcus, the guest of honor, the one getting engaged, actually took a step backward. Like my shame might be contagious. Like associating with me in that moment might somehow contaminate his celebration. But here's what I did in response to being called a parasite in front of my entire extended family. I picked up my small black purse from the side table where I'd set it. I walked over to Marcus, looked him directly in the eye, and congratulated him on his engagement. I told him that Sarah seemed like a wonderful person and that I hoped they would be very happy together. I meant it. My voice was steady and warm. Then I walked to the kitchen, where Aunt Linda was frantically rearranging cheese and crackers on a platter, and I thanked her for hosting such a lovely party. I told her that the potato salad was exceptional and asked if she'd be willing to share the recipe. She mumbled something about mayonnaise and herbs, still not looking at me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue with my mother or demand an apology. I didn't cry or storm out or deliver some dramatic speech about family loyalty and respect. I didn't throw wine in anyone's face or make threats or cause the kind of scene that would have given them permission to say I was being emotional or unstable. I just existed through the moment with grace and dignity, treating everyone around me better than they had treated me. But something clicked inside me during those 15 minutes. Something fundamental and irreversible, like a circuit breaker flipping or a door closing for the last time. It was the sound of a decision being made, quietly and permanently, in a place deeper than conscious thought. That was the moment I knew I was done. Not angry, not hurt, not planning revenge. Just done. Finished with that version of my life. Finished with those relationships. Finished with being someone who could be publicly humiliated while surrounded by people who supposedly loved her. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've stood in a room full of people who were supposed to protect you and realized that their comfort mattered more than your dignity. Maybe you felt that particular kind of betrayal, not the sharp, clean cut of intentional cruelty, but the slow suffocation of systematic indifference. Maybe you've discovered that the people closest to you are the most willing to sacrifice you to avoid their own discomfort. If you have, stay with me. This story is for you too. This story is for everyone who has ever been treated as disposable by people who should have treasured them. Let me tell you why I was living in that house to begin with, because the story she told at that party, the narrative of the dependent adult child mooching off her parents, wasn't even close to the truth. 2 years and 4 months ago, I moved back into my childhood home for one specific reason: to help manage my grandmother's transition from independent living to assisted care. Grandma Rose, my mother's mother, had raised my mother and Uncle David after their parents died in a car accident when my mother was 12. She'd been the foundation of our family for 60 years, the one who hosted holidays, remembered birthdays, mediated conflicts, and kept everyone connected. But dementia was claiming her memories in pieces. First, she forgot names of neighbors, then the layouts of familiar places, then eventually she started forgetting how to operate her own appliances. She'd call the house 3 times in one evening, each time surprised to hear my mother's voice, each time forgetting that she'd already called. Someone needed to coordinate her care, research memory care facilities, sell her house, organize her finances, and make sure her transition was handled with dignity and attention to detail. Someone needed to spend hours on the phone with Medicare representatives, tour dozens of facilities, interview caregivers, and navigate the complex legal and financial requirements of elder care. My mother worked part-time at an upscale boutique and claimed she was too emotional to handle the logistics of her own mother's care. She said that seeing Grandma Rose confused and forgetful was too painful, that she couldn't think clearly enough to make important decisions. Which might have been understandable, except that she also seemed perfectly capable of having emotional clarity when it came to criticizing how other people handled things. My father traveled constantly for his consulting business, sometimes gone for 2 weeks at a stretch, and claimed his schedule was too unpredictable to take on any consistent responsibilities. Uncle David lived 3 states away in Phoenix, visited twice a year, and had his own family to manage. So it fell to me, the single one, the one without children, the one with the flexible job, the one who supposedly had all the time in the world. Never mind that I'd built a career, never mind that I had my own life and responsibilities. I was the obvious choice because my time apparently belonged to the family in a way that no one else's did. I took a temporary unpaid leave from my position at the water treatment facility, moved into my childhood bedroom with its faded purple walls and dusty shelves of books I'd read in high school, and spent the next 18 months becoming an expert in things I'd never wanted to know about. I learned the difference between assisted living and memory care. I researched the pros and cons of different approaches to dementia treatment. I visited 43 facilities within a 100-mile radius, taking notes on everything from staff-to-resident ratios to meal quality to the cleanliness of common areas. I interviewed social workers, toured medical facilities, and read hundreds of online reviews written by families dealing with the same impossible situation. I spent weeks organizing Grandma Rose's finances, discovering accounts she'd forgotten about and bills she'd been paying twice. I found insurance policies that had lapsed and others that were still active but unnecessary. I created spreadsheets, filed paperwork, and made dozens of phone calls to banks, insurance companies, and government agencies. When it came time to sell her house, I cleaned out 60 years of accumulated belongings. I sorted through thousands of photographs, deciding which ones were historically important and which ones were duplicates. I organized decades of correspondence, keeping letters that revealed family history and discarding outdated utility bills. I researched the value of her furniture, her jewelry, her collection of vintage dishes, making sure nothing of significance was accidentally discarded. I held Grandma Rose's hand during her confused moments and reminded her who I was. I sat with her during medical appointments, taking notes and asking questions she forgot to ask. I advocated for her when facility staff weren't meeting her needs, and I celebrated with her when she had good days. The house sold for $340,000 after I staged it, managed the real estate agent, and handled all the paperwork. Grandma Rose's care was fully funded, and she was settled into a beautiful facility where the staff knew her preferences and treated her with genuine kindness. Her precious belongings were distributed according to wishes she'd expressed during her clearer moments, conversations I documented carefully because I knew memory might steal them later. When it was finished, when everything was settled and Grandma Rose was safely established and seeming genuinely happy in her new environment, I planned to move out of my parents' house and return to my normal life. I'd saved money during those 18 months, living rent-free while using my savings to handle the emergencies and expenses that came up during the transition. I was ready to find my own apartment again, return to work full-time, and rebuild the independent adult life I'd temporarily set aside. But somehow, during those 18 months, my temporary stay had transformed into something else entirely. Something I'd never agreed to and didn't understand until it was already too late. Somehow, without any explicit conversation or formal agreement, I'd become the house manager. The person who noticed when appliances were making strange noises and researched repair services. The one who realized when various systems needed maintenance and scheduled appointments with contractors. The one who kept track of warranty information, service records, and the complex schedule of routine maintenance that homeownership requires. When the dishwasher started leaving spots on the glasses, I researched water softener systems. When the guest bathroom toilet began running constantly at 3 in the morning, I diagnosed the problem, ordered replacement parts, and either fixed it myself or called the appropriate professional. When the HVAC system needed its annual maintenance, somehow it became my responsibility to research companies, get quotes, schedule appointments, and be present when the work was done. I arranged for chimney cleaning, gutter repair, carpet cleaning, and pest control. I noticed when weather stripping needed replacement, when caulk around windows was deteriorating, when the garage door opener was struggling. I became the person who researched solutions, contacted vendors, and managed household projects. During my father's business trips, which seemed to become longer and more frequent, I automatically became my mother's companion and emotional support system. Her dinner partner when she didn't want to eat alone. Her sounding board when she felt overwhelmed by anything from confusing medical bills to neighborhood drama. Her personal research assistant when she needed to understand new technology or navigate customer service systems. She would find me working at my laptop and explain how much she needed my help, how much easier everything was when I was there to handle it, how grateful she was to have someone so competent and reliable available. It felt like appreciation, like value, like family taking care of family. Uncle David started calling the house phone and asking to speak with me directly about any family matters, not my parents, me. Estate questions about Grandma Rose's care, decisions about family gatherings, logistical issues that needed coordination. Apparently, I'd become the family's unofficial administrative coordinator without anyone formally offering me the position or asking if I wanted it. I was buying groceries more often than not because anyone asked me to, but because I was the one who noticed when we were running low on things. I was the one who remembered my mother's dental appointments, my father's prescription refills, the annual deadlines for various insurance and tax obligations. I was the one who dealt with customer service representatives when the cable went out, who researched new insurance policies when theirs came up for renewal, who untangled the annual confusion around property tax assessments. I was handling their mail when they traveled, coordinating repairs when they weren't available, managing their schedules when they double-booked themselves. I was solving problems they didn't even realize they had, preventing crises before they developed, making their lives run smoothly in ways that became invisible because they worked so well. And somehow, gradually, imperceptibly, without any conscious decision on anyone's part, my contribution had been reframed as dependence. The more efficiently I made their lives function, the more they seemed to believe I couldn't function without them. The more problems I solved independently, the more helpless they assumed I must be. Because if I was so capable and self-sufficient, why was I still living at home? The fact that I was making their home life better became evidence that I couldn't manage my own life. The fact that I was saving them money became proof that I was financially dependent. The fact that I was available to help became confirmation that I had nothing else going on. It wasn't about money. I had money in the bank, money I'd saved precisely because I was living rent-free while contributing to household expenses. It wasn't about space. I could have afforded my own apartment months earlier and had been planning to find one as soon as Grandma Rose was settled. It wasn't about incompetence. I was successfully managing multiple complex systems and relationships while maintaining my professional certifications and staying current in my field. It was about being reduced to a function instead of being recognized as a person. I had become the family's unpaid personal assistant, property manager, and emotional caretaker, and they had convinced themselves they were doing me a favor by giving me a place to live. I was like a household appliance that everyone had gotten used to relying on, but no one wanted to admit they needed. Useful, efficient, reliable, and completely taken for granted. When I functioned well, I was invisible. When problems arose, I was expected to solve them immediately. And when my value was questioned, it was my existence that was called parasitic, not their dependence on my labor. That night, after Marcus's engagement party, after being publicly humiliated while surrounded by people who had benefited from my presence for months, I came home to the silent house and sat at my laptop until 4:30 in the morning. I started by changing passwords. Every online account that I'd set up for household management, I locked them out of. The utility company logins that I'd created to monitor usage and schedule payments. The insurance portals where I'd been managing claims and policy updates. The subscription services for everything from streaming entertainment to home security monitoring that they'd gotten used to having, but never actually arranged themselves. I transferred accounts that were in my name back to their names. I removed my credit card information from automatic payment systems that I'd set up for their convenience. I canceled services that were being charged to my bank account, the premium cable package, the upgraded internet service, the monthly pest control, the quarterly window cleaning service that I'd arranged and been paying for because it seemed easier than asking them to manage it. I downloaded and organized all the documentation I'd created during the past 18 months. Spreadsheets tracking household maintenance schedules, contact information for every service provider and contractor, warranties and service records for every appliance and system in the house. The detailed calendar of routine maintenance that kept everything functioning smoothly. I copied everything onto a flash drive and organized it into folders with clear labels and instructions. Not because I owed it to them, but because I'm not cruel. Because leaving someone without information they need to maintain their own property would have been vindictive, and I'm not vindictive. I'm just done. I moved through their digital life like a surgeon, carefully extracting myself from every connection, every responsibility, every assumed obligation. It took 6 hours to undo 18 months of invisible integration, and I felt nothing while I did it. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction. Just the calm focus of someone dismantling a machine that no longer served its intended purpose. When I finished, I sat in the dark kitchen and realized that I had just systematically removed myself from systems I had created, relationships I had managed, and responsibilities I had never explicitly agreed to take on. I had been so thoroughly integrated into their daily life that extracting myself required hours of careful work. And they had called me a parasite. Over the next 2 weeks, I packed methodically and deliberately. Not everything I owned, just what I actually needed and wanted to take with me into whatever came next. I was selective in a way that felt like curation rather than abandonment. I packed clothes that I'd bought for myself, that reflected my personal style rather than what seemed appropriate for family dinners and household management. Professional clothes for work, casual clothes for hiking and reading and living alone. I left behind things that felt contaminated by obligation, even things I'd once loved. I took my laptop and essential electronics, my professional books and certifications, my hiking gear and photography equipment, things that represented my interests and competencies outside of family management. I packed my grandmother's jewelry box, which she'd specifically given to me during one of her last clear conversations, telling me that she wanted me to have something beautiful that would remind me of her when she was gone. I left behind furniture I'd brought from my previous apartment, but that had been absorbed into their space and repurposed for their convenience. I left behind books I'd loved, but had read in that house while managing their crises, so they felt tainted by association. I left behind kitchen gadgets I'd bought for cooking elaborate family meals that were always appreciated in the moment and forgotten immediately after. I left behind photographs of family gatherings where I'd been the organizer, the coordinator, the one who made sure everyone was fed and comfortable and happy. Looking at those pictures hurt in a way that surprised me, because I could see my own face in them, always smiling, always engaged, always contributing, and I could remember how good it had felt to be needed, even if I was never truly valued. The house felt like a museum of someone else's life. Someone who had been gradually erased and replaced with a more convenient, more functional, more self-sacrificing version. Someone who had been so focused on meeting other people's needs that she'd stopped noticing when her own needs weren't being met at all. On a Tuesday morning in November, while my parents were both out, my mother at her boutique job, my father at the airport heading to a client meeting in Denver, I loaded my car with 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and a small cooler with lunch for the road. The house was quiet in a way it never was when they were home. No television murmuring in the background, no phone calls about scheduling or logistics, no questions about where things were or how things worked. Just the sound of my footsteps on hardwood floors and the subtle hum of appliances running efficiently because I'd maintained them properly. I walked through each room one final time, not out of nostalgia, but to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The place looked exactly the same as it had for months, but it felt different. It felt like a house where I used to live rather than a place where I belonged. I left my house key on the kitchen counter next to a brief note written on ordinary paper in my ordinary handwriting. Thank you for letting me stay. I'm moving out today. Emergency contact information is in the drawer where you keep the takeout menus. The flash drive with household information is in the desk drawer in Dad's office. That was it. No explanation of my decision, no forwarding address, no emotional goodbye, no list of grievances or demands for acknowledgement. After 18 months of managing their emotions, solving their problems, and absorbing their assumptions about my inadequacy, I gave them exactly what they'd given me at that party. Nothing beyond basic courtesy. I drove away from that house with the same calm focus I'd had while dismantling their digital systems. No tears, no dramatic gestures, no backward glances. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job completed and a decision implemented. The first text came 6 hours later, while I was unpacking books in my new apartment. My mother, Zephyra, what is this note supposed to mean? Call me immediately. The tone was exactly what I'd expected, not concerned, not hurt, not apologetic. Irritated. Inconvenienced. Demanding immediate communication and explanation, as if I owed her a detailed justification for moving out of her house. Then my father, from whatever airport he was in, your mother says you've moved out? This seems sudden. What's going on? Call when you get this. His message was more neutral, but carried the same underlying assumption that my decision was impulsive, inexplicable, something that needed to be corrected through proper communication and rational discussion. Then my mother again, 2 hours later. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic. We can talk about this when you're ready to be reasonable. Dramatic. Unreasonable. The same words that had been used to dismiss my feelings and perspectives my entire life, deployed automatically to frame my perfectly reasonable decision as emotional instability. I didn't respond to any of them. My new apartment was a 1-bedroom place in southeast Portland, on the 2nd floor of a converted craftsman house. It had hardwood floors, large windows with good natural light, and excellent water pressure, something I'd specifically checked during the viewing because good water pressure is a simple pleasure that matters more than people realize. The neighborhood was walkable and quiet, with coffee shops and a farmer's market and a bookstore within 6 blocks. The building had good cell phone reception and reliable internet. The rent was reasonable and the landlord seemed competent and responsive. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. A space that was entirely mine, with no history or emotional complications. For the first time in 18 months, I cooked dinner for one person. I made exactly what I wanted, pasta with garlic and olive oil and red pepper flakes, nothing fancy, but prepared exactly to my taste without consideration for anyone else's preferences or dietary restrictions. I ate it while reading a book about water conservation strategies, something I'd been wanting to read, but hadn't had time for while managing other people's lives. I watched What I Wanted on television, a documentary about coral reef restoration that I found genuinely interesting, but that would have bored my family. I went to bed when I was tired, not when I finished handling someone else's crisis or emergency or dramatic reaction to minor inconvenience. The silence felt strange at first. Not lonely exactly, but unfamiliar. Like hearing my own voice clearly after months of listening to other people talk. Like tasting food that hadn't been seasoned for someone else's palate. Like breathing air that hadn't been filtered through other people's emotions and expectations. I slept for 9 hours straight without being woken up by someone who needed help with a problem that couldn't wait until morning. On Friday evening, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing in the hallway holding a ceramic casserole dish and wearing her most concerned expression. The expression she used when she wanted to convey deep worry while maintaining plausible deniability about her actual motivations. I opened the door and she looked around my small living room like she was documenting evidence of my poor life choices. Taking inventory of my furniture, my decorating decisions, my obviously inadequate living situation. Well, she said after a pause that lasted just long enough to feel uncomfortable, this is cozy. Cozy. The word people use when they mean small, insufficient, disappointing, but want to sound polite. She waited for me to invite her in properly, to offer coffee and comfortable seating, to apologize for leaving so abruptly and without adequate explanation, to express gratitude for her concern and willingness to drive across town to check on me. She expected the conversation where I admitted I'd been unreasonable, where I asked for forgiveness, where I requested permission to come home. Instead, I stood in my doorway and said, "I'm doing well. Thank you for stopping by." Her face shifted through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, irritation, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like panic. The realization that this interaction wasn't following the script she'd expected. "Zephra, I don't understand what's wrong with you lately. Ever since Marcus's party, you've been acting so strange. If I said something that hurt your feelings, I'm sure we can work it out like adults." If she said something, like there was any doubt about whether calling your daughter a parasite in front of 47 family members might constitute saying something hurtful. Like there was any question about whether that had actually happened or whether I might have imagined it or misunderstood it. Like the problem was my sensitivity rather than her cruelty. I didn't take the casserole dish she was still holding. I didn't invite her into my apartment or offer her a place to sit down. I didn't explain that publicly calling your adult daughter a parasite while she's standing in a room full of relatives might constitute more than just saying something that hurt someone's feelings. I didn't point out that framing an apology as if I said something was not actually an apology at all, but rather a way of questioning whether the thing that hurt me had even really happened. After 10 minutes of increasingly desperate attempts to provoke some kind of reaction, stories about how worried my father was, updates about Grandma Rose's health that I already knew because I visited her regularly, complaints about household management tasks that were suddenly more difficult without my help, she left. The consequences of my departure unfolded exactly as I'd expected them to. The heating system broke down during the first real cold snap in December, leaving the house at 58 degrees for 2 days. Apparently, I'd been the one who usually remembered to schedule the annual maintenance that prevented this kind of breakdown. They had to pay emergency rates for after-hours service and replace a part that would have lasted another year with proper maintenance. My father missed 2 important client calls because I wasn't there to remind him about time zone differences when he was traveling or to make sure his backup phone was charged and functioning. He lost 1 consulting contract because he appeared unprofessional and disorganized, costing him more money than I'd spent on groceries in 6 months. My mother called Uncle David in tears because she couldn't figure out why the internet wasn't working, why the streaming services weren't available, why various monthly subscriptions seemed to have been canceled. It took David 3 phone calls to different companies to discover that multiple bills hadn't been paid because I was no longer managing them automatically. They discovered that I'd been paying for services they'd forgotten they were using: the premium cable package that my father used for business news, the upgraded internet speed that my mother needed for her online shopping and video calls with friends, the home security system monitoring that had been giving them peace of mind for months. The property taxes came due and no one could find the paperwork or remember the payment process I'd established. No one knew which assessment documents were current, which exemptions they qualified for, or when the deadline was for appealing their assessed value. They paid late fees and penalties that cost them more than my grocery contributions for 3 months. Various appliances started having problems that could have been prevented with routine maintenance. The garbage disposal jammed because no one remembered that it needed to be cleaned monthly with ice cubes and baking soda. The dryer started taking twice as long to dry clothes because no one cleaned the lint trap or the exhaust vent. The dishwasher began leaving spots on everything because no one refilled the rinse aid dispenser. I learned about these problems through my cousin Lisa, Uncle David's daughter, who called to check on how I was settling into my new place and mentioned, almost casually, how stressed everyone in the family seemed lately. "Your mom seems really overwhelmed," Lisa said during one of our conversations in January. "I guess she's having trouble keeping up with all the house stuff." Dad said he's been getting a lot of panicked phone calls about bills and appointments and things breaking down. "It's like she doesn't know how to manage basic household systems anymore." I felt no satisfaction hearing this. No vindictive pleasure in their struggles, no sense of justice being served. Just a hollow confirmation that I'd been right about what my role in that house had really been. Just the quiet validation that my contribution had been real and significant, even if it had never been acknowledged or appreciated. But Lisa surprised me. Instead of suggesting that I should go back and help them, instead of implying that their problems were somehow my responsibility to solve, she said something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. "You know, I never realized how much you were doing for them until I started hearing about all the things that aren't working now. It's probably good that you're making them figure it out themselves. They're adults. They should be able to manage their own lives without expecting you to sacrifice yours." Someone saw me. Someone understood that my leaving hadn't been selfish or dramatic or parasitic. Someone recognized that I'd been carrying weight that wasn't mine to carry, solving problems that weren't mine to solve, managing systems that other capable adults should have been handling themselves. Someone understood that independence was healthy, that boundaries were necessary, that my decision to live my own life was reasonable and long overdue. Lisa became my unexpected ally in ways I hadn't anticipated needing. She was there, physically present and supportive, when my father showed up at my workplace, demanding to speak with me about what he called this ridiculous situation. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February. I was reviewing water quality reports in my office when the receptionist called to tell me that my father was in the lobby asking to see me. I told her to let him know that I was working and couldn't meet during business hours, that he could call me later if he wanted to discuss something. 5 minutes later, he was standing in my office doorway with the kind of aggressive posture that suggested he wasn't planning to accept reasonable boundaries. "We need to talk," he said, without greeting or preliminary courtesy. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this whole thing has gone far enough. Your mother is upset, the house is falling apart, and you're being completely unreasonable about a simple misunderstanding." Simple misunderstanding. As if being publicly called a parasite was just a communication error that could be resolved through proper discussion. He wanted to know why I was punishing the family for what he characterized as one unfortunate comment. He insisted that I was overreacting, that family members should be able to forgive each other's mistakes, that my absence was hurting everyone and solving nothing. He never acknowledged that what my mother had said was cruel or inappropriate. He never suggested that she should apologize or that anyone's behavior needed to change. The entire conversation was premised on the assumption that I was the problem and that I needed to fix whatever was wrong with me. Lisa showed up halfway through this conversation. She'd been planning to take me to lunch and arrived to find my father lecturing me about family responsibility in my own office. She listened for exactly 30 seconds before stepping in. "Excuse me," she said to my father with the kind of polite firmness that made it clear she wasn't actually asking permission. "Zephyra, are you available for lunch, or should I wait?" She gave me an exit strategy and support in a moment when I needed both. She treated my father's inappropriate workplace intrusion as exactly that, inappropriate, rather than pretending it was normal family business that I should handle on his terms. When he tried to include her in the conversation, tried to get her to agree that I was being unreasonable, she said something that stopped him completely. "I think Zephyr's decision to live independently is healthy and overdue. Most adults don't live with their parents, and I don't understand why anyone would expect her to sacrifice her own life to manage yours." He left after that. Not because he'd been convinced that I was right, but because he'd been confronted with a perspective he couldn't dismiss or manipulate. Lisa was also there 2 weeks later when my mother tried a different approach. Instead of showing up at my apartment or my workplace, she tried to guilt me into coming home by claiming that my absence was destroying the family's traditions and that Grandma Rose would be disappointed in me if she understood what was happening. She called while I was having coffee with Lisa on a Saturday morning, and Lisa watched me handle the conversation with the kind of calm directness I'd been practicing. "I visit Grandma Rose every other Sunday," I told my mother. "She's doing well and seems happy. I don't think she would be disappointed that I'm living independently as an adult." But what about family dinners? What about holidays? What about the way things used to be? "Things change," I said. "People grow up and build their own lives. That's normal and healthy. But we miss you. The house feels empty without you. I'm sure you can figure out how to manage your household without me." After I hung up, Lisa looked at me with something that looked like admiration. "You've gotten really good at that," she said. "Setting boundaries without being mean about it. Staying calm when someone's trying to make you feel guilty. It's impressive." Having one person on my side changed everything. Not because I needed someone to fight my battles for me, but because I needed someone to witness that I wasn't the problem. Someone to confirm that my perspective was reasonable, that my decisions were healthy, that I wasn't crazy or selfish or ungrateful. Someone to remind me that family dysfunction doesn't become normal just because you've lived with it long enough to get used to it. By March, the crisis calls from my parents had stopped coming. They'd figured out their systems, hired professionals to handle what I used to do, or adapted to living with slightly less convenience and efficiency. They'd adjusted to my absence the same way they'd adjusted to my presence, gradually, unconsciously, and then completely. My father hired a property management service to handle routine maintenance scheduling. My mother found a personal assistant who helped with bill paying and appointment scheduling for $12 an hour. They learned to manage their own technology problems or pay for technical support. They figured out how to coordinate their travel schedules without using me as their personal administrative assistant. In other words, they learned to function as independent adults, something they'd been perfectly capable of doing all along, but had chosen not to do as long as I was available to handle things for them. I established a routine that belonged entirely to me. I returned to work full-time and threw myself into a water quality improvement project that had been waiting for months while I was managing family crises. I started hiking every Saturday morning, exploring trails I'd been wanting to try for years. I joined a photography group and began documenting the natural areas around Portland. I read books that no one interrupted me to discuss. I cooked elaborate meals for myself without having to consider anyone else's preferences or dietary restrictions. I made friends with my neighbors, who were interesting people leading interesting lives that had nothing to do with family obligation or crisis management. I bought season tickets to the Portland Symphony and attended concerts where I could focus entirely on the music without worrying about anyone else's entertainment or comfort. I took a weekend pottery class and discovered that I enjoyed working with clay, something I'd never had time to explore while managing other people's lives. Contact with my parents became minimal and formal. Holiday cards with generic messages. Brief phone calls on birthdays that covered health, weather, and surface-level updates. Polite exchanges about Grandma Rose's health when I visited her myself, which I continued to do regularly because my relationship with her was separate from my relationship with them. They never apologized for the parasite comment. They never acknowledged what I'd contributed to their household during those 18 months. They never seemed to understand why I'd left or why I wouldn't come back. In their version of events, I'd overreacted to a minor criticism and was now stubbornly maintaining an unreasonable position that was hurting everyone for no good reason. But you know what? I reclaimed that word. I took it back and made it mine and turned it into something completely different. Parasite. She called me a parasite in front of 47 people who chose to let her do it. Parasites take without giving. Parasites drain resources without contributing value. Parasites weaken their hosts by consuming what they need for survival. But when I left, their life became harder, not easier. When I removed myself from their household, they struggled to maintain systems I'd been managing, processes I'd been coordinating, relationships I'd been nurturing. When they lost access to my labor, my organization, my problem-solving abilities, my emotional support, they had to hire people and pay for services and figure out solutions. When I stopped contributing to their household, they discovered that their household had been significantly dependent on my contributions. So who was really the parasite in that relationship? Who was taking without giving? Who was draining resources without providing value? Who was weakening whom? I think about this story sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, living exactly the life I choose to live, accountable to no one but myself and the people I choose to care about. I think about how many people are trapped in relationships where being needed gets confused with being valued, where contribution gets reframed as dependence, where leaving gets called abandonment even when staying means disappearing. I think about how easy it is to become invisible in your own life when you're focused on making everyone else's life visible and manageable. How natural it feels to sacrifice your own needs when you've been trained to believe that other people's comfort is more important than your dignity. I think about how many people are managing other people's lives while being told that they're incapable of managing their own. Here's what I learned during those months of reconstruction and self-discovery. Being needed is not the same as being respected. Solving problems for people doesn't earn you consideration. Making yourself indispensable doesn't make you loved. Contributing to someone's life doesn't guarantee that they'll value your presence or treat you with basic human decency. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for them is to let them discover what your presence was actually worth. Silence can be a boundary. Absence can be an answer. Walking away doesn't always mean giving up on someone. Sometimes it means finally choosing yourself. Sometimes it means refusing to accept treatment that you wouldn't tolerate from strangers just because it's coming from people who share your DNA. Sometimes it means recognizing that family dysfunction doesn't become acceptable just because it's familiar. My name is Zefra Nakamura. I'm 32 years old. I ensure that 650,000 people have clean, safe water flowing from their taps every single day. I live in an apartment with excellent water pressure and large windows and neighbors who treat me with basic respect. I visit my grandmother twice a month because I love her and because our relationship is based on genuine affection rather than assumed obligation. I have friends who value my company, colleagues who respect my expertise, and a life that belongs entirely to me. I make my own decisions, solve my own problems, and sleep soundly every night without worrying about crises that aren't mine to handle. And that, I can tell you with absolute certainty, is the opposite of being a parasite. That's what independence actually looks like.